Welcome here. My name is Bob Burt. I'm currently engaged by IUFRO. I am writing their science piece. I do their spotlights. I'm a former communications manager with the Canadian Forest Service. And before that, for many years, I was a reporter and editor with several newspapers in Canada. Yeah, I know, newspapers, so 20th century. Anyway, many years that I covered and tried to communicate forest science, I would occasionally ask myself, what would the great man, the philosopher of science, Albert Einstein, say to us if he could help us? Well, today, through the magic of our modern technology, we're going to find out. I have a time machine. We're going to fire it up, contact the great man, and see if he'll talk to us. I hope. Sir? Oh, there he is. Dr. Einstein, is that you? Hello, sir. Hello. Professor Einstein?
Hello.
Hi there. We're in the year 2017. I've got forest scientists and academics here. We'd like you to give us some advice and help. Are you willing to do that, sir?
Well, hello there. Oh, this is what the 21st century looks like. Too bad. So, you want to know about relativity?
Actually, no, sir. Thanks anyway. What we really want is advice on communicating science, especially countering negative preconceptions about forests.
Preconceptions? What kind of preconceptions?
Well, I guess actually prejudices. In Europe, for instance, people think their forests are shrinking. In fact, they're growing larger every year.
Ah, well, it can be harder to crack a prejudice than an atom.
So what you're saying, I think, is we can do it, but it ain't going to be easy.
Oh, yes, sir. I didn't say it will be impossible, but it will be difficult. Perseverance is everything. But as I always say, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity.
I think you're right. It seems to me that at least part of our problem is we keep doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result.
To me, that sounds like the definition of insanity. Come to think of it, I really like it. Can I use your line?
You bet. I'm glad to help. But tell us, really, what would you advise us to do in terms of communicating science?
Simple. Simplicity itself. Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler.
But if you can't do that, then what?
It's obvious, really. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Go back to the drawing board, my boy. Back to the drawing board.
Well, thank you. Goodbye. We're going to have... Thank you. We're going to ask you to save your questions until everyone has spoken so that we get them all at the end of the session. And in the meantime, we'll be bringing up people to talk about those 4 interesting points that he raised. The first one, it is harder to crack a prejudice than an atom. I'm going to introduce Ingwald Gschwandtl and Kai Lintunen. Ingwald is head of forest policy and information in the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Environment, and Water Management in Austria. He is also longtime leader of the UNECE FAO Forest Communicators Network, the FCN. Kai is head of the international communications with the Finnish Forest Association and is a deputy leader of the FCN. Based on their combined 40 years of championing effective, concerted, sustained forest communication, Kai and Ingwald will explain why forestry is often severely misunderstood and what it takes to make forest communications effective. Gentlemen?
Yeah, thank you, Bob, and good afternoon to all of you. It can be harder to crack a prejudice than an atom. We heard Albert Einstein say. So the question is, what are prejudices we encounter in forestry?
Well, let's face it, forestry has an image problem. And I guess science a little as well.
Of course, we all know that sustainable forest management provides us with wonderful products, services, and solutions for global challenges.
However, many people still believe that using forests is bad for the planet.
Sound, please. Well, facts are facts, but perception is reality. And here's a case from Europe. The majority of Europeans believe that forest area in Europe is shrinking. Research clearly shows. Research also shows that, in fact, the forest area in this region is significantly increasing. So why this misperception?
Well, media coverage on forests is predominantly negative. It focuses on deforestation, illegal logging, and forest fires. And of course, in addition, there are these aggressive social media campaigns against cutting down trees. Or then there's the opposite, painting forests as this overly romantic, pure, untouched nature.
Sustainable management of forests is underrepresented in the public debate. Forestry has been in the forefront of defining sustainability and putting it into practice. And this is a story we should be incredibly proud of. We need to tell it better, larger, louder, longer.
But our challenge is still that we undervalue and misunderstand communication. And by that, what do we mean by communication?
Too often, communication is confused with information providing. Communication is much more than disseminating data. It's not about giving out. It's about breaking through to the hearts and minds of people, making an impact on what they think, what they believe, what they do.
Yeah, communication means being heard and being reacted on. And for this, we need to build a strong and continuous dialogue on forests where listening is at least as important as talking. So how do we go about achieving this?
10 points for successful communication we wish to share with you. Number one is political will.
If you don't get the support from the top, you won't succeed. So you need the people who hold the budgets and take decisions to understand the importance of communications and how it can benefit their core business.
And then you need capacity to communicate well.
That means we need the right people with the right skills and the right knowledge. If they're not there, we need to find them or train them.
You need, of course, adequate resources to do it.
Like any other activity, communication comes at a cost, and it needs to be a part of the budget. Many organizations include a fixed percentage on communications in their projects already.
Communication is a long-term process, so you need a strategy.
To fail to plan is a plan to fail. Good communications needs to be planned and sustained, and everyone involved needs to know what the messages are and what we want to achieve.
Communication, not to forget, is done for a purpose.
Every good communication strategy comes with a set of clear aims and objectives, so we're specific about what we want to achieve.
The truth lies in evidence.
So you have to base your objectives and tactics on the best available facts, knowledge, and data available to you, and use credible sources.
Be specific about your target audiences.
So, who do you need to communicate with? What do they think or do now? What do you want them to do or think? And how can you reach them?
Create mechanisms for sharing promotion and outreach with partners and other stakeholders.
That means pool your resources with partners and define common messages and capitalize on each other's strengths.
You cannot communicate if your audience is not paying attention and not listening.
Great communication needs to grab and hold people's attention, so do it in a unique and innovative way, and use surprise tactics to challenge.
And last but not least, cracking a prejudice requires endurance, so persevere.
Yeah, remember, big changes will not happen overnight, so don't give up. Keep at it, keep at it, keep at it.
So these are 10 points for successful communication we wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Professor Einstein's second point was, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Scientists challenge paradigms and seek solutions to difficult issues. Jennifer Hayes and Yasmeen are both public affairs specialists with the United States Forest Service. They will share case studies of how the scientists they worked with seized the opportunity to communicate research findings for difficult issues, including wildland fire and human health. Ladies?
Thank you, Bob. Hello, everyone. It's so great to see all of you out here. Kai, Ingwald, thank you so much for setting this talk up so perfectly. They've just spoken about the importance of communication and doing more than just providing information, the idea of communicating with purpose. And I'm really excited because that's what we're going to talk with you about today. In this digital age, as we all know, there is an abundance of information available. It's a blessing and a curse. We have to sort through it all, and that is why science translation, science synthesis, people to deliver the technical findings in a way that the public and managers can understand is so important. And I think it's really unique, this quote, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. We have scientists every day that I think do this. And this quote was actually one of his 3 rules of work. And if you don't know what the other 2 are, from clutter, find simplicity, and from discord, find harmony. And I think that all of these could be applied to the topic of communication. And I think that the scientists that I work with do this regularly, and I think the one scientist that I will feature for you today has not only done this, but has also taken the 10 tips for successful communication that we just heard and applied it beautifully in concert with the communication folks at our station. And so that's what I'm here to talk with you about today, so let's get at it. If the slides will work. Just one moment. Yeah? Well, maybe not. I'm going to talk to you about wildfire. And I've got some really cool graphics that I'd love to show you. So let's see if we can get them fired up here. Maybe? Or maybe not. Okay. All right, well, I will just talk to you about my story about wildfire, because as many of you in here know, it's... Nope, okay. We'll work on it. So wildfires, as many of you in here know, they are not just a local issue or a regional issue or a national issue. Wildfires can be a global issue. And I'd love to show you my cool graphics, but we'll just keep moving. Many people in this world see them as a crisis that happens each year, and they impact millions of people, but they're also part of ecosystems. They're natural regulating processes, and many forests depend on fire for their ecosystems to be healthy and to survive. And because of this kind of juxtaposition of being a crisis and a very important component of ecosystems, they're not only important to manage, but they're also very difficult to communicate about, because people have built homes in forests, and smoke, it can cause health concerns, and carbon that had been sequestered is now emitted, and species of conservation concern could lose habitat, or water quality could be degraded. And the public needs accurate, real-time information in order to be safe. And there's really good news. The scientists that I work with, they are out there addressing all of these issues. They are out there taking on this challenge. They are creating accessible and understandable information about these issues in fire science. And I'm really excited today to present a case study about one of these scientists specifically. And I'm going to check in and see if my PowerPoint might be able to come up, because I'd love to show you this. Any luck? No? Okay. Maybe? No? Okay, well, let's just keep going. So I will say that I am incredibly privileged and honored to work with many scientists in this group, in this crowd out here today, actually, and at the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station. And they are innovative, they are entrepreneurial, they are smart, and I am so lucky to present a case study about one of these, a science superstar who rose to the challenge of becoming an excellent science communicator. And this story, it starts at our Fire Sciences Laboratory in Missoula, Montana. Are we going to be able to bring up the slides by any chance? 2 minutes. Okay, well, that might be too late, so I don't want to keep you guys waiting. So many of you in this room might know the person I'm going to talk about. His name is Mark Finney. Just anybody in here know Mark Finney? Okay, good. We've got a couple people. Mark is a researcher. He's a fire scientist at the Missoula Fire Sciences Laboratory, and he studies fundamental fire research, fire behavior. And you would think that in 100 years of fire science, and the U.S. Forest Service this past year celebrated, or in the recent history celebrated, 100 years of fire science, that we would have all of the answers. Oh, it's coming up, but I don't have it on my screen, so I'm gonna go forward, keep going all the forward to the fire lab. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. These are all things that I was just talking about. Keep going. Yeah, here we go, right here, this slide. Great, excellent. Thank you so much, guys, for fixing that. I appreciate it. So in this 100 years, right, we've made a ton of progress in fire science. We've made great discoveries, but there's still a lot of stuff we don't know, and that's why fundamental research is so cool. This basic research is so cool, because you never know when you're going to make the big breakthrough. And while Mark and his team and his collaborators have made tremendous contributions to the field, in 2014, they had a major breakthrough. See, the fire lab where they work has this really cool burn chamber. They also have all kinds of other cool tools like a wind tunnel, but the folks there are really smart, and they make these laser-engineered cardboard fuel beds that they can burn to simulate fire. And I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. And they also go out into the field and they do prescribed burning that they can observe, and they look at wildland fire as well. And they took a long-held assumption that fire was spread by radiative heat, meaning like this hot tree could cause this tree to burn. So I just want you to imagine being around a campfire and putting your hands out and feeling the heat. That's radiative heat. And they took that story and showed that it was actually not true for all fuel types, like fine fuels, like the grasses you just saw in this slide. So they filmed and mapped these flames and this fire behavior, and they actually showed it was a little bit more predictable than thought. and that it was the flame buoyancy and the contact with hot gases and the flame contact that was causing the ignition of these fine particles, these grasses, that it was the convective heat that was governing how fire was spreading in these fuel types. So, really cool contribution to the field. So they published this, and they've published many papers, but this paper in particular they published in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science. Many of you may know this journal. It's very prominent in the United States, and Mark knew that this research was way too important to let sit on the shelf, so he made it his personal mission to communicate about these research findings, knowing that they could not only improve firefighter safety and allow for better modeling of fire behavior and multiple fuel types, but that they could save lives, that this research could save a lot of money and property as well. And he was already an excellent ambassador for this research, but he enlisted my colleagues at the Rocky Mountain Research Station to create a strategic communication strategy to accompany this research, and they did. They had, and this is Mark here talking about his research. They created news releases and web pages and social media posts about his research, and we also coordinated interviews for Mark. And Mark has done a lot of interviews. He's been on CBS, which is a prominent network in the United States, 60 Minutes. He was covered in the Atlantic magazine. He was on National Geographic's Going Deep with David Rees. He was in New York Times magazine. He has been in a variety of local and regional and national and international news outlets, and basically he hasn't stopped. He keeps talking because he knows that this science communication is a continuous process. He was incredibly successful in this because of his passion and his confidence in his findings and his ability to continue with this communication over the long run. And there's all kinds of great products that he has created and that our team has helped distribute to accompany these messages. And he works with policymakers too to make sure like our congressional members understand what it is that these findings mean as they create new policies. And so I think it's really important that we understand that a lot of things are out of our control, like what's going on in the media and politics and society, and wildfire usually gets a lot of national attention. So it may seem very easy to communicate about, but it's actually not. But for those of you out there doing other types of research that maybe don't get the same type of media attention, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to bring it into the national dialogue or the local dialogue or whatever level you're striving for. But basically what I want to say to you is don't be afraid to communicate your science. You can do this. You can have an impact. You can let that passion that you have for your research shine. You can engage. You can do all of this, and you can find people to help you communicate. I know many of you don't have access to professional communication resources like some large organizations do, but you can develop a set of key messages and practice them with a colleague and get those nailed down, and then your colleague can also help tell your story. So you can really do this on your own if you just take the time and have the passion and let that come through. So what I want to say to you is don't stop at the facts. Tell people why your research matters, and please get out there and communicate about it so we can inform this narrative that we've been talking about. We can have these two-way dialogues with people that matter. And Mark rose to the challenge of being an excellent science communicator, and I know all of you out there can do the same. And I think another excellent example of a team of scientists that did this is from the Pacific Northwest Research Station, and Yasmeen is going to tell you a little story about them. So Yasmeen?
Thank you, Jen. So indulge me for just a little bit. Imagine for a moment that you're a scientist conducting an exploratory study. You wonder if the moss growing abundantly on the trees in your city might tell you something about air pollution. So you collect hundreds of moss samples from one end of your city to the other, and you chemically analyze them. When your results come back from the laboratory and you plot them on a map, you're absolutely alarmed by what you find. Concentrations of several harmful heavy metals, including some linked to cancer, are incredibly high in your moss samples. In fact, there are actually 2 hotspots of one particularly harmful heavy metal, cadmium, located right in the heart of your city, surrounded by schools and child care centers, by businesses, and by homes. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of people live and work within these areas. You're so concerned by what you see that you share your preliminary results with state and city officials. Their instrumental monitors confirm that cadmium levels within these hotspots are 49 times higher than what's considered safe for people to breathe. For my colleagues and I at the U.S. Forest Service's Pacific Northwest Research Station in Portland, Oregon, this scenario was our reality last year. I'm going to spend just a few minutes highlighting my experience communicating the Portland Moss and Air Quality Study, because I think it's a helpful case study that highlights not only the importance of communication to the application of science, but also of the potential to find opportunity in the midst of great difficulty. When our preliminary findings were made public, our scientists very quickly found themselves at the center of intense interest and scrutiny in their research. Citizens who were frightened and mistrustful wondered what our findings revealed, and more importantly, what it means for their health. Officials charged with responding to this crisis were eager to learn details about our studies and how they might best respond to them. News media became watchdogs. They wanted to know how this pollution happened, and more importantly, what somebody was going to do about it. Within this difficult situation, our science team recognized an opportunity to apply their science to help citizens, officials, and the media not only understand, but solve this public health crisis. Strategic communication was absolutely essential to us throughout our outreach process. To help ease citizens' anxiety and empower them to advocate for clean air, our scientists participated in many community meetings and public events in those areas affected by the pollution hotspots. To maintain regular contact and promote transparency in their science, we launched and maintain to this day a listserv that we use to share study information and updates, and an email inbox that we use to solicit and respond to inquiries about our study. We also launched and maintain a website that highlights findings from our study, provides background information, links to published papers and general reports, and provides key contact information. To provide context to those air quality officials that are charged with curtailing the pollution, our science team participated in meetings and engaged in numerous in-person, email, and telephone consultations. To help our media understand the nuances of our study, we wrote and distributed news releases, we updated that study website, and we held a press conference where our science team summarized their findings, reiterated key messages and important caveats, demonstrated an interactive Moss study map, and answered questions live from reporters. Additionally, we informed members of our Congress and other policymakers who ultimately proposed changes in both air quality monitoring and permitting through direct consultations, briefing papers, and participation in media events that they hosted. I think it's safe to say today that our research and communications campaign ultimately helped improve air quality in our community. Our Moss study ultimately helped to identify 2 stained glass manufacturers as the source of the cadmium pollution in these hotspots. Prior to our work, these types of smaller scale manufacturers were not required to have certain air quality permits, which meant that emissions of some heavy metals like cadmium went unregulated. As a result of our research and communications campaign, the larger of the 2 manufacturers installed a pollution control device on their facility, after which air quality in our community dramatically improved. Our research and communications campaign continues to make a real impact Instrumental air quality monitors, like the ones used by officials, actually measure levels of pollutants in the air, but they're pretty expensive to operate. That means that cities like Portland may only have 1 or 2 monitors to cover their entire city. As you can imagine, that means pollution can be missed. Our MOS method sampled the entire city at a fraction of the cost of operating just one of these monitors, and, pretty cool, showed that a very specific species of moss is actually a super accurate bioindicator or living barometer of cadmium air pollution. Our approach and our findings are currently being used by the City of Portland to help strategically place their limited resources and identify potential areas of pollution concern. Our MOS research program continues, and I think humbly reminds us of the power of forest science to dramatically improve people's lives. In our case, in a very immediate and measurable way. In both of the examples that Jen and I described here, scientists recognized, and I think more importantly, harnessed this opportunity to help people by communicating and applying their science, even when that meant conducting dozens of interviews and spending countless hours with reporters, as Mark Finney at Jen's office did, or hundreds of really scared citizens and very eager regulators, as my MOS researchers did. Our scientists were successful, we think, because they regarded their communication not as a one-way transfer of information, but as a very rich two-way dialogue founded on mutual respect, a clear understanding of information needs, and a very strong desire to make a difference.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. Jen, I see that in the midst of your difficulty, you gave us the opportunity to pay closer attention to what was a very compelling oral presentation. Thank you. Now we're going to go to point 3 from Dr. Einstein, which was everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. We'll turn it back over to Kai. He's going to talk about messaging and how we struggle to get our messages heard in an era of information overload. Kai?
Am I on? Yep. Yeah, I'm going to say on a bit more general level, a couple of words on messaging and how we operate in a very complex environment as a sector and trying to get our messages heard. So, about change. We live in a world where change is abundant, it's fast and it's constant. It takes place not only the climate changes, but we work in an environment where change happens all the time. And in this world, some forest issues are quite high on the environmental discussion agenda. There are some pretty familiar themes, deforestation, use of biomass. Is it good for the climate? Is it not? Illegal logging. And there's, of course, the latest edition of the Sustainable Development Goals. How do forests relate to them? Do they contribute to them? Is there connection? What kind of connection? So with such a wonderful renewable resource, one sometimes wonders, how do we end up in the bad person's corner? We in the north, in Finland, for example, were tremendously proud of the solutions that sustainable use of forests is able to bring to challenges. Maybe one thing that explains it, that previously the use of natural resources were considered like there was a freedom of a kind and to use them. And then little by little environmental concerns and sustainability and responsibility questions entered the discussion. And nowadays natural resources, of course, are seen more as a collective property, and it's not automatically accepted that we use it. So we as a sector need to secure an acceptance from the society and perhaps even a right to use, a permission to use forests. And for this we need to build social capital, build trust get a license to operate. And in times of fake news, we need to be active, we need to be vocal, and we need to be confident, but understanding as well. If we don't communicate with common messages, some other people will on our behalf, and they actually are already. So when I say understanding, we already touched upon that earlier with Ingwald, is that we need to learn to listen. We're so proud of our good case that we sometimes just shout louder and forget we need a two-way communication. So, a couple of words in the different ways of communicating to affect the situation to our benefit in a very simplified way. You know, there's new electronic avenues popping up by the minute in the social media world, especially. And conversations will take place on forests on them. And we need to be a part of that discussion, or those talks, and not let the vocals for some other entrepreneurs. So we need to use this opportunity to get engaged. At the same time, because of the vast and fast change, we need to keep up to speed so we know what goes on there and we are able to influence it with our messages. At first, social media looked like it was an interesting, nice little environment in the internet, but then someone realized it proved to be good business. So it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. So we need to position ourselves there and focus where we want to be on all this, or otherwise we'll get overwhelmed. Ingwald already said earlier that fact is fact, but perception is reality. This applies to the digital world as well. Fact is fact, but perception may be someone else's reality. So we need to be careful and try and steer the discussion for our benefit. Of course, the strongest, once again, focus. We all know this phenomenon from the discussion sites and comment fields on any internet publication. Whoops. Ah, good, that went black. Yes, of course, the strongest and the most trustworthy interaction is human to human, between real people. We currently understand and mix friends with friends. So it is the people who know you the best and trust you the most who can wind up helping you the most as well. So we need to find a balance between networking somewhere in the digital environment and networking online, person to person, to try and influence things, to get our messages heard. And we need to balance these. Of course, traditional media still plays an important role, and it is a very credible source of information, but it is changing as well. Since we're in Europe now, I will bring up a communications case, a challenge for the forest sector in Europe. There's no real home for forest issues in Brussels. Forest-related issues are tackled and handled in many institutions and many houses. And I heard a figure that on the European level, there are some 250 so organizations promoting either forests, wood, products, any kind of combination of those. So the question is, are we speaking the same language? If we get 250 or many different kinds of messages, you get white noise. You don't have a concerted action. Some of the competitors put their eggs in lesser baskets and have a strong voice. So, in the lobby la la land, whom will they listen to then? Having said that, we have a very good current example how Finnish and other stakeholders worked and communicated very effectively just recently on a European Parliament proposal on LULUCF, which would have set, from our perspective, the northern forests and the sustainable forest management of northern forests to an unfair position. And that's a very good example of concerted action between stakeholders and between players in different countries. So, we have a very good case. Since we're in Germany, I brought it up as our German friends like to think themselves as fathers and mothers of sustainability. It's very good. It's a good starting point. But we need to push together towards a common goal, because this is just the beginning. We need to be relevant in the future and stay relevant as well. And I'll end with a phrase that we used quite a lot, and it's part of the reason that we're here as well. It's too late to form a network when you need one. And that's all I had to say today. Thank you very much.
I want to thank all of our presenters today. You guys all did a great job, I think. Covered a broad cross-section of how we communicate and what communication is all about. We're going to throw it open to questions now. And since I have the microphone, I'm going to make an executive decision to ask the first question, something that came up the other day. At the Science Meets Policy panel, we heard that we need a new narrative for forests. So I'm going to throw this, I'll start with you, Ingwald, and then maybe Kai, and then Jen. What do you think the role of the individual scientist versus the role of the professional communicator is for creating this new narrative?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yesterday at this policy science panel, there was a call for a new narrative on forests. And we know that, I think you all are aware that the narrative on forests has changed over time from, let's say, sustainable or sustained yield of wood to the broader, very broad concept, including environmental concerns, societal concerns, and so on. And it might change again. There might be a need to look at forests for the future with a different angle. Broader, maybe bioeconomy as a term we might mention here, simply something as part of a future-fit economy, the transition from fossil-based to bio-based economy and so on. So the question is then, what actually does then communication do with this? What is the role? And there we have to be very clear that communication certainly will not replace policy making. And this is a crucial part for a narrative to set the conceptual framework, the policy framework. Communication will not replace science. Yeah? Science you need as the basis, yeah, to generate the right knowledge. And communication will certainly also not replace doing business, so to apply everything. But these three factors, policy making, science, and business, doing business, they have to come together. This has to work together in order to generate this new narrative. And communication is kind of the means in between that interconnects those different segments and sectors and carries it all, also the issues that come and the stories and the concepts that come abroad to get the broadest possible understanding, the broadest possible acceptance, and also support for such a new narrative. This is how I would kind of see this type of question. Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah. Yes, I would
like to echo what Ingwald said. I think there's a need to go further away from the black and white, either or discussion, and communication can help with what I mentioned in the presentation on social capital and building trust, and exactly these partnerships. And then you want to expand. It's not a closed club of who's in the know, and the permission for forests to be used to provide solutions for the global challenges. That I think that that's kind of roughly the where I want to see it in a kind of responsible and inclusive way, as opposed to being very polarized as we sometimes seem to be.
Thank you, Kai.
Well, I would like to say that I think scientists, individual scientists, absolutely have a role in helping to shape this narrative, not as necessarily advocates for policies, but science is at the core, as you mentioned, Ingwald, of informing what is going to be the policy. They actually know their work better than anyone else, so they should be the ones talking about their work, laying that foundation, providing some great information by which this narrative can be shaped. And I think, you know, this idea of the networks, Kai, that you brought up in your talk, this idea of having these networks, you know, before you need them, right? I mean, that's what we're doing now. We're building this great network here at this IUFRO meeting, and scientists are so well networked. So not only can their research inform this narrative, I think, but their network can help build support for that narrative. And so I would like to say I think they absolutely have a role, and I think that communicators have a role in supporting them and taking that research that they're coming out with and helping to translate that science in a way that the general public and policymakers can understand. And I'd say with confidence, a lot of people in this room are probably already doing that, but maybe as communicators we could provide more support to them to be successful in those efforts.
Thank you. Anybody out there? Yes, please.
What is your advice to scientists who may have evidence that contradicts current policy or current political will?
Anybody want to jump in on that one? You want to take it? I can.
What I said in the presentation together with Kai, what we said is truth lies in evidence. So if you come up with something that contradicts policy, of course, there's a difficult stand probably, but there's a certain type of responsibility to come forward with this, and particularly then you need professional support from the communication side in order to present this properly. In order, you need to be very strategic, very well prepared, and you might have a lot of reactions. There's actually you might not be used to this because usually science is sometimes a bit boring, a bit not so interesting. It's not the bad news, it's not the conflict, it's not. But if you, I mean, it's an excellent starting point. Bob is a former journalist, so maybe he could explain a little bit better. And then if you have if you create a conflict, you will have attention all over the place. But make sure that you're very professional and to back it up also with communication, proper data and communication.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think that as Ingwald says, the strength is in the evidence. But before you go public with that evidence, you should speak truth to power internally. You have to go to your people first and say, look, this is what my findings show. And try to steer the change in policy internally. After that, it's questionable what will happen, but if you go external first, you're going to be in deep doo-doo.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. Very informative. My name is Caramel. I'm from WWF. Just one quick thought and then one question. A thought related to this whole image problem that one of the speakers brought up, things related to forests. And one of the things that I think lacking in the forest space is kind of a unified vision.
We're having a little trouble hearing you up here. Can you speak louder, please?
Can you hear me better? Yes? Better?
No.
Hello? Okay, I'm gonna try to yell a bit louder. So, no?
Just yell at us.
So, one of the challenges I see that we are facing is kind of a unified vision for forests. So, if we look at the climate space, you have a goal of 2 degree or 1.5 degree that we can rally around. For the forest, many years ago, my organization kind of experimented with this slogan of a zero net deforestation and forest degradation. And we got so many questions about what do you mean by net, the deforestation, degradation, how to measure those. We ended up producing 10-page long guidance that doesn't really help communication. But I'm just thinking, if we could, have the science community and IUFRO and the people can rally around and have a vision. We have a 4 billion hectares of forest, and how much of that we want to conserve, where and how. And if we can have something that people could generally agree on, I think that would really help us put the responsible forest management in a positive light and allow us to be able to communicate that. So that's just a quick reflection on the image problem. I'll be interested in hear if somebody on the stage would like to build on that. And my question is just trying to get some practical advice as for how to communicate around uncertainties that comes with the scientific studies. And a lot of research comes with the caveats that are longer than the actual conclusion, and we always find it, and nothing is really definitive, and there's a quest for more. But we, at some point, for the communication purpose, we do have to, have some clear message that goes out to the public. And I wonder if any of the communicators will have advice or concrete examples of how you deal with this uncertainty issues. Thank you.
The question is how to simplify.
I can comment on the first part, and Yasmeen maybe on the second. Yes. As an example that comes to mind, a recent example, is that sometimes the UN papers and the UN institutions seem to be far away and they're not far from our reality. But just recently, this year, as UN came up with the strategic plan on forest, that I find a kind of a promising example. To halt deforestation is already yesterday's goal. It's 3% increase on the area of forest globally. It doesn't sound a lot, but it is a compromise. And there is a new kind of a glimmer of hope in the narrative as well. That it's not, it is a combination of protecting and having the use of various products and services forests provide as a solution, and not just that the growing pressure on population poses threats. But that is a kind of a new way of trying to combine to having the sustainable use as a part of protecting the forest. So that kind of steers in the right direction. I don't know if that, well, that was a comment, so that is just, that came to my mind on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. That's, I think, a really good one, the idea of communicating around uncertainty. I want to kind of speak to that a little bit, just using an example from our Moss study, because I think that was a place where we really recognized the challenge of that. And early in our study kind of cycle, when our preliminary findings came back initially and revealed these two hotspots, our scientists shared the information because they realized that there was a tremendous amount of public value in doing so, but our findings were still preliminary. So our scientists hadn't yet had a chance to go through the process of validating or corroborating their Moss concentration data with those instrumental monitors that I mentioned. So when we were doing our initial outreach, definitely one of the greatest challenges we had was trying to preserve that context and that nuance when we were communicating with our audiences. And there were definitely times where amidst the emotion and I think in the zeal for media to share what, as you probably saw, were very dramatic visuals of the concentrations of pollutants in our Moss samples, there was a tendency to not necessarily preserve those caveats that we attempted to convey, and that was that this is just a relative sample and follow-up instrumental monitoring was needed. So I think one of the things that we did that Ingwald and Kai really spoke to was just persevere. I mean, we drove that point home every single time we could at community meetings, when we were interacting with people individually. Was one of the reasons why later we decided to have a press conference, because we wanted to look reporters in the eye if we could, or hear their voices and really convey that nuance, and that was the need to corroborate these preliminary findings before we could say that what we were seeing in the Moss was necessarily evident of what we were seeing in the air, or breathing rather. So I think your point is a very, very good one. I think it's something that we struggle with as communicators all the time, but really the key to that is to stay true to honoring that uncertainty, communicating it when it's important, and just persevering.
Thank you, Yasmeen.
Yeah, maybe if I can just add something on how to simplify the messages. I think for us, this is certainly the most difficult part, and this is the challenging part, and it's the part that I don't want to say waste our time, but we invest a lot of time to convince inside the house that we need to simplify the messages, because it's really a question of either people read or people listen or watch the video or absolutely nothing. There's nothing in between. So if you have a text and it's very simplified, and then obviously all the technical officers want to add this word and this sentence and so on, for me, what is difficult to convince them is like, if you add that word or this sentence, there will be nothing. So that's the difficult part. So it is a process of convincing, and there are lots of examples around. You can just show the spot now, so that you have a good example. But basically, it is important, depending who your target audience is, but if you want to target audience the general public, you really have to make sure that the message is very simple and stay simple.
Okay, I will just, when I was working for the CFS, I used to try to help our scientists communicate more easily with the public. Sometimes there was a reluctance because of the fear of vulgarizing their findings, the fear of looking foolish to their peers. What I tried to get across to them was, your peers know you. The people you're trying to reach now are people who don't know you, who don't really know what in the world you're talking about. And the example I would use with them, to try to get a laugh out of them, if nothing else, was, I'm sure you all know people who, if they were asked to comment on a budget cut, would say, well, it's fruitless to become lachrymose over a precipitously departed lacteal fluid. Whereas anybody else would say, no use crying over spilled milk. And guess which one would be better understood. That's the idea, to get that understanding of people. We used to, as journalists, we used to be told to write or broadcast our stories for about a grade 6 level. That's about people about 12 years old. That's the depth you're looking for when you're trying to make that first cut at communications generally. Yes, sir.
So I have a two-part question. And the first part is, could you comment on what you feel the role of higher education is in this business of communicating about forests? And secondly, perhaps comment on what you feel that higher education is not doing that it could be doing relative to playing a role in this whole process of communication. And I'm thinking specifically about forestry, natural resources, environmental science type programs.
Who wants it? Jan?
I could try. I don't know that I'll get to all points of your question, but I work a lot with, we have a lot of students that come in and do internships in our office and the communications staff, and one of the things that we look for are people that have really good writing skills. And when we have some of the students that come in at even the highest levels of education, they're in their PhD programs, they're writing at a very, very technical level. They're writing for their thesis, for the journals, and while they're very strong writers, the translation of that technical scientific information into things like blogs and more understandable, as Bob just said. I don't think in a lot of what we're doing it's necessarily the 6th grade level, but it's certainly not at a PhD level. And I think that some training or offering some advice on how to write for the non-technical audience, and maybe even requiring that, would be very, very helpful in terms of helping them more successfully craft a narrative about their research, requiring them to practice their elevator speech, requiring them to have key messages and be able to talk exactly about their research in less than 2 minutes. I think it's, as I show frequently, there's this Mark Twain quote that, you know, if you want me to give a 2-hour speech, I'm ready now. If you want me to give a 5-minute speech, I need 5 days, or something like that. And so it takes a lot of time and effort to craft those messages, and I think that in the higher education, if people are going to be going out and putting their face in front of the public, talking about their science, giving them the training and the skills to be able to do that would be really good.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No? Yes, sir.
Am I on? Yes. My name is Dirk from Bavaria, a forester and a communicator. And thank you for these very impressive examples of how to communicate messages and how to set them into spots. And as I looked at this, I thought you showed heroes. You showed Mark Finney as a hero coming up with scientific results, or the Moss analyzing scientists, they found something out which was very important for people, and so they are heroes too. And in International Day of Forest, the forest itself is the hero. In my perception as a forester, we are very often, most of the time, not the hero. We are the baddie, cutting trees. Also, we are communicating since decades that we are doing it sustainable. So, the question, how would have been your spot for the forester cutting trees? How would have been the spot for sustainable forest management? How would have been the spot for the scientist, applying and wanting to make the forest managed?
Yeah, I mean, if you think that these spots are done within a few minutes, that is a big disappointment. It takes us about 3 months to come up with a script, because it's very challenging to simplify the messages, but also to get the message across. I mean, obviously, even in the spot here, the sustainability is in there. I mean, you saw it at the end. So we obviously try, and in our communication, to promote this. And certainly each time we have a theme, we have to think about it. And mainly, I mean, I can just give you some generic indications. Normally what works really well is to have a problem before and you come up with a solution. And that's something that the general public likes a lot. Or to ask them to take action somehow. So I think I cannot really respond to you within a few minutes on how to create it. If you want, we can have a tete-a-tete and try and come out and with an idea. But what I'm saying is each theme can be transformed and promoted in a similar way. You just have to find politically a right way to do it. And as I said, try to have a challenge and come up with a solution. And I think it will work. I mean, we have lots of campaigns, and I think maybe the forest sector could do more, certainly. So, you know, and especially with social media now, you know, we can all do our own videos. It can be, we all connected and we can all promote each other's products. And I think that's a very important element, actually, which was quite crucial. I didn't mention the whole social media outreach we had with the spot because I focused only on the TV, but that's a very important element that we should not forget, especially as forest communicators. Forest, I think, cross-promotion is very important. I'm not sure if I answered your question or if someone else wants to say something to that.
Sven Wunder from CIFOR. Thank you very much for these presentations. I like them a lot. I thought it was a lot about the dissemination part and the information and how are we using the science to influence decision making. And that's, you know, very timely, and it's something obviously that in a lot of fora we're being pressured towards as scientists. But I understand these Einstein quotes also very much about the science process itself. And I wonder if some of those sort of those aspects are worth to think about. For instance, the last one about not having understood things well enough to make them, to present them simple. We could ask ourselves if our science is always, you know, provides the context conditions for really researching things sufficiently, profoundly, to actually get to that point in the knowledge curve where we surpass the complexity levels and can present it simple. Our funding horizons, for instance, are they large enough? Are the projects that we have to engage in, are they long enough? Are young scientists not often pressurized to quickly publish results with minimum publishable units because our career systems sort of favor that? In other words, are we doing the science in a way that actually promises to deliver on what Einstein was prescribing for us?
Nobody? Go ahead, Jen.
I appreciate the comment. I don't know that I really have anything to add to it because, as you said, there are always so many elements that are forcing our hand, and I see that a lot, but I would just say the integrity part of the science and having good mentors, and again, reaching out to this network that is here, getting involved with those working parties and research groups here within the network to ask questions about your research and if in fact it stands up against maybe some of the expectations or the assumptions that others hold. So I don't really have anything to add except for that I think it's a very valid point.
Yeah, just again from the perspective of our Moss study, I think one of the points, and I really appreciate that I heard you kind of allude to, is how can scientists kind of speak to issues of the moment and work on issues that are kind of communicating or addressing just kind of current issues. But one thing I will say is what made our Moss study, I think, so wonderful in a couple regards is that this was an exploratory study. Our scientists did it for very little money, and they literally were driving around the city in a minivan during the winter. So it didn't take a lot of effort, and they were just kind of taking a chance. So I think there's great value in being strategic, but this study, I think, was such an important reminder of just having a little bit of that serendipity that I think science can also provide. So I would just offer that too. I definitely think there is value in being strategic and in pursuing research that's going to speak to issues of the moment, but I would just make a little plug too for just following a little bit of that bliss too, and maybe just taking a chance when that makes sense. In our case, it ended up being hugely important. Our researchers really had no idea that they would uncover these pollution hotspots that they did. So I would just make a plug for a little bit of that science magic as well.
And down near the front here.
Thank you. I'm Gary Steindlecker. I'm a consultant on integrated sustainability solution. It was a very interesting session. Thank you very much. And also the questions which were posed here describe the complexity and the difficulty of the issue. But my question, it's first a quick observation. From all your presentations, I always ask myself, have your communication, what was the purpose of your communication? For what? You tell somebody for being aware of, to be informed of, to do something for me, to do something for yourself, so change your behavior. I was not always crystal clear. I think, and how do you think? So my question is, how important is it that communication is effective, that you are crystal clear about the purpose for what you communicate?
Thank you very much for this question, because you touch a very fundamental issue in communication. I think in everything that is done, this is fundamental to understand why would you do it. And in the introduction, you might remember that we clearly said communication is done for a purpose. First of all, you have to be very clear, what would you like to achieve with it? Why would you do it? What should be different afterwards? I think the question stems from the fact that very often this is neglected. Very often you start, okay, we have to do something. We have to do a leaflet, a press release, or whatever. But if this is not part of a wider strategy, if it's just a singular individual event activity, it might not achieve very much. So you put this into a broader strategic concept, and you have very clear objectives what you wish to achieve. And of course, how they would be, or what this would be, this depends very much on the circumstance. If you work for a research institution here or there, at this or that level, you work for a very specific program, or you are a consultant working on your own. So the objectives can be completely different. At the end, so you have to define this for yourself, and it should be, they say they have certain criteria for good objectives, aims, goals for a communication strategy. They should be measurable, and so on. At the end, what you usually wish to achieve is to be understood. Everybody wants to be understood. Why don't they understand what I say, what I do, what I want? You want to be understood. You want to have support. You want to get support for your research work, what you do. You want to get recognition, and so on. So generally, this is there. And if I may, it's so important that this is actually number one, what you have to look into before you start to think about any type of activity and other things. And this takes me also to the question which was posed before on, I think by Dirk, on this difficulty to explain why we cut trees, why forestry does what it does. Some people call it the forestry slaughterhouse syndrome, because people love the forest, they like wood, but the process in between they dislike. It's not very nice to cut trees, it looks like devastation and so. And everybody can see it. Forestry works out in the open. So what to do with this? And it was said, do you have a video that explains this simply? No, it doesn't work like this. You have to look at all these points. Firstly, you only can work through this through a long-term campaign, strategic approach. Then secondly, what we also kind of try to emphasize, emotions play an important role. It's not about information providing. The information is there, the data is there. It is sustainably, if you do it in a proper way, over a couple of years, and so this will be green again and grow and. But data don't do the trick. Yeah? They don't arrive at people. So there's the emotions. Emotions come through pictures. Emotions come through language. Yeah? Be very careful about their language. There are experts, they say, okay, basic recognition. It's a difference if you say dog. Everybody has immediate feeling about dog. Yeah? Regardless if you like a dog or not. But animal is abstract. So I think it's a bit similar with forests. With forests, everybody has some type of feeling when it comes to forests. But if you say sustainable forest management, you're already at a level which doesn't touch really people. So this is a lot to work on when it comes to forests and forestry. Also an important aspect in this regard is to create an emotional connection between people and people dealing with forests. There is this, when you work with children, yeah? I know that Dirk, the colleague who put the question here, he works a lot with children, forest pedagogics. You take out kids to the forest, and the foresters do that, and they have a big day out in forests. That's an excellent starting point. You don't confront them with all the data and all the information you have available on your ecological, your economic, and your social performance. No. You just give them a great day out in forests, completely natural, completely open. They can see what happens there, and they will remember if it's well done for a lifetime. And so the next step would then be to get into the information or the interaction on what you actually do and so on. So not a simple answer to a complex matter and complex question, but there is a way to do it if you do it very strategic, very systematic, very structured. Thank you.
We have one question from our online audience that I will throw out here. People often believe the loudest and or the first opinion that's out there. And once misinformation is out, it's very difficult to change the narrative. How can we, as a forestry community, band together to better manage or drive the narrative? You want that one, Kai?
Yeah, I think, yes, once it's out, it's a great challenge to tackle it, but what we already mentioned before is that you need to build partnerships. You're not in the know yourself, and not just inside the forest sector, not just inside the scientific community, but you search for partnerships from outside the forest sector, and you build understanding and get away from the black and white, and pool your resources and define common messages. We're never going to have we shouldn't have a unified one truth kind of an approach, but it's a very sobering thought that there is a discussion, and we need to be constructive with it and look for broad shoulders and credible evidence and good partners.
Thank you very much. We're running a bit over time, folks, so I think, is there one more question here? All right, we'll take that, and then I think that's going to have to wrap it up. Thank you, go ahead.
I have a question regarding the MOS research, and I would like to know what were the most difficult challenges faced in designing the communication strategy, and how you deal with those challenges.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I actually kind of got a chance to talk a little bit about that when I responded to the other question. But I think probably the most kind of enduring challenge that we faced was, again, just contextualizing our findings. It was really important, again, because this was an exploratory study that yielded initially these preliminary results, that we provided as much information as we could about how these results could or couldn't be interpreted. Especially when we generated the Moss maps, I think it was very tempting for the media or the public to see those maps and immediately assume that they also represented what was present in the air, and that wasn't true. So it was very complicated in some ways to try to convey that nuance, but it was something that we realized was incredibly important to do, especially in those early stages before we had the chance to corroborate that data with instrumental monitors that did ultimately find that that moss species was very good at serving as a bioindicator. So I think that was probably for us the most difficult situation that, again, just highlights kind of what Ingwald was just saying too, just this strategic approach. It also gets, I think, a little bit at the question that we were just asked about what you do when misinformation or kind of misconceptions are out there. And I think for us, we used those things as signs that we needed to do something differently. And I think when you encounter a misconception or you see misinformation, I would just really encourage you to kind of dig deep and try to get at the core of what might have prompted that misinformation. And I think for us, it spoke to the fact that some audiences were not able to distinguish when they saw things visually, that what they were seeing in moss was not necessarily what they were breathing in air. So I would just encourage you, if you do find the narrative shifting in a way that doesn't accurately reflect your information or you encounter misinformation, just dive a little deeply and try to use that to inform how you move forward in your communications.
Not on the moss study, but I think to the question of the challenges in communicating, I know that we had this really wonderful example from Maria of this viral campaign. And when you've got these scientists that are engaging in this, I think one of the biggest challenges when you do this really effectively, and as a scientist, you get out there and your work is out there and you're then being asked to speak all the time and do these interviews and respond to these inquiries, that you don't burn out, that you pace yourself. I think a challenge is keeping people energized, because these are, as we heard from Ingwald and Kai and everyone, these are long-term campaigns. This science isn't just something you talk about once and then you're done. It's informing a broader narrative, and as that narrative grows and is shared with a broader audience, then you also have to continue to talk about it, and then you have to continue to hone your message. So I think a big challenge is also not burning yourself out when you find yourself engaged in one of these excellent opportunities, and so I'll just mention that.
Okay, thank you all for your attention. We appreciate it. As you can tell, we're kind of enthusiastic about this idea of communicating. Anyway, thank you very much.